Welcome to today's webinar presented by Supercoder.com. Supercoder.com is an online coding solution offering Part A and B coding reference tools, resources, and not more than 30 specialty coding and compliance newsletters from the Coding Institute in one site. I hope you enjoy this short session.
The issue of universal protocols, surgical timeouts, and those kind of things, since literally almost all, here in the United States at least, almost all of our solid organ transplantation is done at usually the major medical centers, major universities, therefore usually mostly teaching hospitals. Just as a kind of friendly reminder that we have surgical residents, we have certainly surgical fellows. We have to make sure that our attendings are understanding how these op notes need to be dictated. My private company does literally probably almost 1,000 audits a year, I would imagine, with all the folks. And we do a lot of transplant audits as well, particularly not only on the coding side, but also from a clinical compliance perspective that I bring in. And what I find is a lot of times is that the op notes are probably, politely said, lacking in maybe appropriate documentation. Many of them are overkill, but to say the least, probably done by a younger or junior resident, but that's good. At least they need the training. However, they need to understand that a lot of the information that they bring is clinical relevance, but it may not bring a lot of reimbursement relevance. And as you all know, probably, that that reimbursement has a different perspective than the clinical side. A lot of these codes seem to be pretty close, don't always make a great deal of sense, but seem to fit at least a little bit. So on this first universal pre-procedure slide, it's pretty common. Again, these are all standards that have been adopted through the World Health Organization, adopted through JCO now for the last several years and been in play. So it's just most of this ought to be a review for probably many of you. About the surgical timeouts, about marking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have many surgical op notes here, and I've got 3 screens in front of me here, so I've got them up there just in case. But the ones I'm looking at all look excellent, so I'm just throwing this out there as review. Moving on to the next one, perform a surgical timeout, is pretty standard. Standard format for anybody to be calling the surgical timeout. The surgeon is the head of the ship in the operating room, so they need to agree with the anesthesiology folks as well as the circulating nurse in the room, who is really the one in charge of everything else going on outside of the physician and the anesthesia folks. Everybody needs to come to agreement, and it needs to be articulated that way. A nice little short little paragraph is the introductory paragraph after the preoperative diagnosis, post-op, alleged procedure performed, blah, blah, blah. Next one is the indications for surgery. That should always be there now, particularly nowadays. And in a transplant situation, that's imperative to understand, again, the medical necessity of what's going on, as well as why are we really here and what are we really doing? Are we doing a new organ transplant? Are we putting in a new liver? Is this a redo? What kind of a liver are we putting in? Has it been cut? Has it been taken from an adult and we're putting it into a kid? Et cetera, et cetera. Are we doing a single lung, a double lung? Are we putting a pancreas with or without a kidney? All those kind of things need to be pretty important and kind of articulated and dictated up front. Always subject to change, of course, as you abstract through the record, but that needs to be up there. And then the very next paragraph is patient brought in the operating room, blah, 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 placed up in the up on the surgical table, yada, 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 general anesthesia, and usually leg squeezes are applied or whatever language they use there. Plus, finally, a surgical timeout was performed and all came to agreement. Then you move on to the real operative note, where the real meat and potatoes is, where every coder should be coding from anyway.
Supercoder is the fastest growing online reference tool with more than 25,000 subscribers. Call 866-228-9252 to get a free product demo or sign up at supercoder.com for a 7-day free trial.